Hey Pierre, how's it going?
I'm good, Amy. How are you?
Funny meeting you here. I'm good. I
So, what are
think
we
we're
doing
gonna,
today?
I think we're going to talk about something regarding Azure VMware Solution, but this time disaster recovery.
Oh, that's right. We're doing the deployed disaster recovery using VMware Site Recovery Manager on Azure VMware Solution. That just kind of rolls off the tongue,
Oh
doesn't it?
yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. And for you watching or in the chat, if you want to follow along, make sure to follow this link or aka.ms/learn live 2022-0301E. We just have the nicest URLs, don't we?
You too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at that URL, you will actually have the learn module that we're covering today. So you'll be able to step through all of the units with us and answer the knowledge questions at the end.
Or the fancy QR code too.
And the fancy QR code. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
So, Amy, what is VMware Site Recovery Manager?
Well, honestly, if you've been using VMware for a long time, you're probably familiar with VMware Site Recovery Manager as a BCDR solution. So it's really easy to protect your VMware workloads in vCenter, um, have a migration plan, and then do failover testing, spin up a test environment and check that your apps are talking to your databases and then spin it back down and clean up. So it's a great solution for protecting your workloads.
It, I find that in the real world, um, often you get companies or organizations that they say they have a business recovery or what BC business continuity disaster recovery plan,
Yeah,
uh, but they never test it because it's hard to test.
definitely.
If you don't have a solution that's built for it, because you don't want to like fail over for no apparent reason, but you don't have a sandbox to fail over to, and
Mhm.
if you do fail over, some may not have like their testing protocols all lined up. So for you watching, this is a very, very important part of the BCDR process, is to actually plan, um, test, uh, and adjust
Mhm.
your business continuity planning, because as your system do, environments change over time. So your plan doesn't have to stay static. It has to evolve with your organization and your environment.
Yeah, and I've personally found that DR is like the last thing people think about. It's like you have everything set up, you have backups running, but you don't have a true DR plan. Like backups are not the same as having a disaster recovery plan. So it is really important to have some kind of solution in place to be able, like, heaven forbid something happens, that you're able to at least get the bare minimum up and running. So,
Well, backups are they're part of the plan,
mhm,
but they
yeah,
are not the plan,
the
because
plan, right.
they only cover you for data loss. So something,
Mhm,
if you've accidentally or on purpose by error lost some data, then you
mhm,
recover that data from backup,
mhm,
but it's not a continuity plan.
right.
Got
Exactly.
it. Okay. So what are we going to do while we're checking this out?
Mhm.
Sorry.
Well, we're gonna show how you can use VMware SRM and vSphere replication with the Azure VMware solution. So not only does it work on VMware, you can also use it in AVS. So it's pretty cool.
Okay. So uh, SRM is kind of like the VMware equivalent of ASR,
Yes.
which is Azure Site Recovery, where we replicate running VMs to another region or another resource group in case something happens to the primary.
Correct. Yep. This
Okay.
is the VMware side of it. Mhm.
VMware side of it. Okay, good. So in order to get there, there's a few things that we have to identify in terms of workflow or prerequisite. Number one is we have to identify what our recovery time objectives and our recovery point objectives are. And I often get questions for people that are not like specialists in recovery or in
Mhm.
continuity or planning of that stuff. They're like, okay, well, what's the difference between a recovery time objectives and a recovery point objective?
Mhm. It can be confusing. RTO, RPO.
RTO, RPO, and some people kind of like twist them around where they'll
Mhm.
take the RPO where the RTO should be and the RTO where the RPO should be. But really, the recovery time objective is how much time can you survive being down?
Mhm.
That just boils down to it. It just how much time are you okay to be down for?
Mhm.
And your recovery point objective is how much data are you okay with losing? So how much data can you endure losing? Because when you think about um, business continuity and disaster recovery, the closest you get to a real time replication, the more expensive typically it gets
Of course.
because you have to have all of these kind of snapshots of your VM, and that takes replication time. That means your pipe has to be like really, really fast so it could do near real time replication because there isn't such thing as like absolute real time replication. So I call it near real time. And then so you end up having a cost that is so great that sometimes it'll scare companies away.
Mhm.
So by identifying what your RTO and RPO objectives are, your thresholds, then you can actually build a recovery plan that is both efficient, meets those two criterias, but also can be affordable and therefore be useful.
Yeah, it's definitely important to know your company's SLAs and whether you can reach them with the money that you have because yes, there might be some ridiculous, well, we need, we can only survive 2 hours and we need, it's like, well, could we? I mean, are we a trading firm or are we, what are you a hospital? Like what kind of business are you in where you can take the time, save the money, but get back up and running or suffer, a few hours of data loss or,
Yeah. So if you're a mom and pop web shop selling widgets, you can survive with a couple hours downtime. If you're a nuclear silo or nuclear plant, maybe you should make sure that you're up all the time.
sure.
So it all depends on your business and where your responsibilities and your SLAs lie. Thank you. SLAs and SLOs.
Mm, there you go.
Your service level agreements, but your
Mhm.
service level objectives as
Objectives.
well. All right. So move on. A couple things that the VMware Site Recovery Manager will do for you is it helps your planning because it actually starts replicating your infrastructure for you. So, for example, your management systems, your networking, the operating system, that like all of the backend configuration and backend infrastructure operations that happen on your VMware site.
Mhm.
Um, SRM will actually replicate that because it's all uh, what's the term um, software defined data center.
Data center. Yep.
Because it's software defined, it's a configuration that's like in a just like in Azure we have the ARM templates.
Mhm.
In VMware, you got your own version of that software defined data center, and it can replicate that to another environment. So the first thing it does is it replicates that environment. Second question is from where to where. So if we're
Mm.
looking at our environments, you can easily use Site Recovery Manager on Azure VMware Solution to replicate from, like, if currently you have one, you have a disaster recovery site.
Mhm.
It means you're paying for 2 sites. So if that second site is there solely for business continuity, then it becomes very expensive.
Mhm.
If you have a company that have multiple sites, then you can replicate site A to site B and site B to site A, so you can leverage infrastructure that you already own. So that's good. But if you don't, and you only got that business recovery site, you can use Site Recovery Manager on AVS to basically do away with that extra cost of renting that real estate or those rented racks at a hoster, and then move that into Azure.
Mhm.
You can also, if you don't have any plan at all and you don't have any replicated sites right now, you can have AVS as your primary replicated site. That would make it a secondary site.
Good point.
Yeah, or if you're already in AVS, you can replicate to another AVS site or to
Mhm.
another on-prem site. So there are a lot of different scenarios where you can replicate to make your environment more robust and more resilient to, well, not necessarily resilient to failure, but easily recoverable from failure.
And actually having a plan.
And actually having a plan. But the plan is, once you've got your AVS environment up and running, and of
Mhm.
course, if you don't have one already, we've already covered how to install and get going with AVS in the module that's I've now listed at the bottom of the screen. So aka/learn live-2022-0301C, because today we're doing 01E. There's a whole module on how to install it and how to get going. So check that
Yeah.
out. Then you can go back to the one we have now.
So now you know what SRM is, and now we're going to show you how to use it in Azure VMware Solution. So it's pretty easy to set up through the interface, but first we're going to go over the architecture of how it works. You have your ExpressRoute global reach enabled through those enterprise edge routers. And on this slide, you'll see we have a primary Azure VMware solution replicating over to the secondary site. And it might be a little hard to see, but it was the best image at the time. But you have your edge routers with ExpressRoute enabling that replication, so you can get those that RTO to whatever you need it to be. So in order to enable this, you have to have that Azure vConnect and create your ExpressRoute gateway. So you go into your portal, and then go into your subscription, and you actually type in the subscription ID of the other site, and then you put in a authorization key that you request. So you request an authorization key and paste it in there, and then you're able to connect to the other site. And
So
then
that's basically to encrypt the communication in between those two sites, correct?
yeah, it's allowing them to talk together. So yeah, you go into your primary site and you copy over this information from the secondary site. So you go into connectivity, and then there's a ExpressRoute global reach tab, and then that's where you can request a key, copy it from there, and then you can also copy over the ExpressRoute config.
Okay.
And then deploying Site Recovery Manager on AVS is pretty easy through the portal. We're going to show that here.
Okay. Sorry.
It's okay. So you go into add-ons in your software-defined data center. We're going to go into and select VMware Site Recovery Manager. I don't have a license key right now, so we'll just go with the default here and install. This can actually take, this is pre-recorded because this takes about a good 30 minutes because it's starting to set up all that infrastructure for Site Recovery Manager. So here the deployment is in progress. You'll see it starting to create, and then we can go to the resource. And here we have it. We've done part 1.
Okay.
So easy as that. And then after that, you install the vSphere replication appliance, which I believe you're going to show us.
Yeah. The appliance itself is literally what the word says. It's a very small VM that sits in each of your VMware environment, and the role of that appliance is to hold a small database that collects and keeps all of your configuration in terms of how often you replicate, what the replication state of your VMs, what you're replicating between all the sites, and everything that is your configuration for your disaster recovery plan. It's literally a very small VM that sits into both environments, and it's very easy to deploy because when we're looking at deploying it, basically all we're going to do is go back to our add-on environment in AVS, go to disaster recovery. In our case, we still don't have a license key. I'm going to select a vSphere replication, figure out how many vSphere servers I'm going to deploy it to, and click install. And then the whole process is going to go and deploy that little VM in that environment, and it'll become your replication appliance.
Yeah.
And once it's done, it's done. It's actually fairly quick to actually set up. You don't have to download a VM and install it. You don't have an OVA file to copy and to import or anything like that.
Exactly.
Just go to your VS environment and select it, and it'll be deployed for you.
Yeah, no, actually, you'll see it if you go into vCenter. You'll see the site recovery option in there, so it's pretty cool.
So there you have it. Appliance is installed, and we are ready for the next step. And I think, Amy, you're going to be covering the next step.
So yes, the next step is configuring your vCenter site pairings. So we're going to go over that as part of the SRM process. So to completely protect your VMware VMs, we have to connect each vCenter instance so they can talk, and we can map folders and data stores and networks and run protection policies based on that information. So here's just a slide how to start off in your vCenter, where you'll select the vCenter and then select the target vCenter and put in the host name, the port's already filled out for you, and then your cloud admin credentials. And we have a video to demonstrate this. So here we go. We're in the portal, and we're in our AVS environment. We're hitting disaster recovery. And we click on identity because we have to log into the vCenter.
And of course, we never know what the password is.
No, it's secret.
It's secret, so we have to copy it from the portal.
Right. What's the password? So cloud admin is always your AVS login for vCenter. And then we'll paste the password.
The password is password
1, 2, 3. And then if you go to menu, you'll see site recovery is there. So our installation worked, but we need to pair. So the green check marks are a good thing. We're going to open site recovery and create our new site pair. So that's our current vCenter showing up. Click new site pair. We're going to enter in that other vCenter. And this will use FQDN here. Type it out, and then the username, password. You better get this right or it's not going to work. I got it wrong, apparently. There we go. Click next. You're going to get a security alert for the certificate. Just connect. And then we'll select our vCenter and then select all services because that's what we want to replicate. And click next. Get another security alert for the certificate, another one. Just accept them, connect, and now it's ready to complete. And you hit finish. Should be good to go.
Yeah, and at this point, I'd just like to point out that at the beginning when we were talking about prerequisites, that's one thing I jumped over.
Okay.
Mostly because for some reason we always assume that it's just going to work. But DNS replication and DNS being able to do name resolution across your environment back and forth, so that from your on-prem to from primary to secondary and secondary back to primary, you need to be able to have proper DNS name resolution there.
Mhm.
Whether it's private DNS, public DNS, that can all be accommodated, but it's very, very important that that is done before you start the SRM process.
Correct. Because you don't want to blame DNS again, right?
No, because it's got enough on its shoulder already.
So back to the slide. Yeah. So speaking about ports, you need, port 80, 443 for, the SSL connections, 1433 for database, and so forth. So ports and DNS, all very important for site recovery to work.
And those ports, as I assume, are
Mhm.
from between each of those primary, secondary sites, not open to the internet. Correct.
Right. Cloud to
Okay.
cloud or on-prem to cloud. Yeah, you need those ports pretty much so they can talk to each other and replicate properly and you can access everything.
Mhm.
And then so now that you have that created, that pairing, you can create mappings between the sites. So you'll map your networks, your prod network to your failover network, your folders, compute resources, and storage policy mappings. But we can go over showing how to map some of that for you. Let's see. Oh, also, yeah, to enable bi-directional protection, you need to also create reverse mappings, and we won't show that in the video, but we'll show some of the mappings that you need to do to at least get started for failing over.
And then, what do you mean by bidirectional protection and reprotect?
Well, once you fail over, you eventually want to fail back, I would think. So you need to tell it, how to fail back over. So you don't want to just go one way, you want to go back to the other way too. Because it might
So
be
if you've
more
operated for a couple days on your backup site, you want to
right.
be able to replicate those transactions back to your primary site before you fail back.
Hmm.
Okay, I
Correct.
get it.
And then configuring replication on the VMs. So before you can create protection groups, you got to select the actual VMs and click on the replication, like how, what is it, the RPO, RTO? It would be your RPO, the amount of time you're going to replicate the data. And again, you might be prompted to sign in with your vCenter credentials with Cloud Admin. And then here's a good screenshot just showing replication settings. Are you going to go every 5 minutes? That probably not. There's a good slider. And then how many instances per day are you going to replicate? And then how long are you going to keep that? So what do you think
And
about
then that
going every
ties
5 minutes?
back that ties back to our introduction when we were talking about how RTO and RPOs are very important in terms of costing. Because if you're getting, I don't know, 60 instances of your or 60 copies of your VM per day, and you're keeping them for 30 days, you end up with some storage costs and replication costs
Mhm.
on traffic that are a lot higher than if you're doing one replication, like five of them, 5 a day, and you keep them for 5 days. Then that's 25 versus hundreds.
Right. So do you want to pay the money for that, 5 minute replication or
Well, in some
what
cases,
can
you might want to. We've
right,
mentioned that.
right. Depending on your SLAs and SLOs. Right. So your service level agreement with the business, they might say, yeah, we will pay for that. We need that. Or no, it's not in scope. We can handle, 6 hours loss and, so your mileage may vary. So here we can demo configuring this replication. So we're in our new site pair, and then we're going to log in to the SRM here, the SRM. Yeah, so we can see our site pair, and we're going to go into vCenter now and select the folders very slowly here. Let's go. Come on. Here we go. So select folders, and then here we can select which VMs are going to replicate. And so we'll go through and say this one's going to replicate You're special. You're special. You get to replicate. And then we can select configure recovery plan. So there's a nice wizard that walks you through. You see your target site, you select it, and then we're going to show that we're adding the mappings here. It validates the VMs that they're ready to replicate. And we can pick our target data store and then pick those replication settings. So we'll just keep that. It works for me. Click next. Oh, okay. And you can also encrypt. So it's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
And then our protection group, we're just going to go on our own here and we're ready to complete. And you'll see it running in vCenter. The outgoing replication. And then site pair. And now we can map our network. So go to network mappings, new. We're going to just create them manually here. Next, click on the data center and pick which network we want to map. Then pick our target. We're going to map to this one. And then you add the mappings below. Scroll down. Is there anything else we want to map? There we go. So workloads to workloads and add it. And then click next. And then the reverse mapping. So when you fail back over, that's important to have, unless you want to be stuck in your other. And any test networks. So when you test your DR plan, you don't impact prod. Now we're ready to complete. Click finish. And that is that. So that's mapping the network folders. You can go beyond that and map storage groups, but we just didn't have time to go through that. But there's definitely a lot of information out there to learn, But the wizard's really good at walking you through mapping data stores,
Yeah, and I find it useful that in some cases, if you have different networks in different environment, those are set up so that like the IPs don't, for example, collide. You don't have overlap in your subnetting. So to be able to map this network to this network, so when you transfer a VM or when it fail over VM from this place to this place, it's going to get a new IP address from the network that you've mapped to it. And the fact that you can just say, enable reverse mapping, where it basically does it in reverse once you're looking at your failback, is very useful in your setting up your disaster recovery.
Yeah, it makes it pretty easy to fail over and fail back.
Yep.
So you can also create those protection groups I mentioned earlier, where you group VMs into, if you have a certain application, you want the web apps with the databases, you'll want those to fail over at the same time. So you'll want to create a protection group for that. And then, so this is just a screenshot showing protecting individual VMs with replication, but you can also do it based on data stores. So replicate a whole data store, depending on how your company's set up, that might work for you. And I believe we have another demonstration.
Yep.
So creating protection groups, we're in site recovery still. And now we're going to name it web apps and put our web apps in there. So let's see.
And in production, you want to put a good description.
Oh, yeah. Descriptions. No way. So I'm going to select all the VMs here. Yeah, the more descriptions, the better. If you get hit by a bus, you want to be able to run this after you. So recovery plan, which one are we going to use? We're going to call it web app. The web app recovery plan. See? Self-explanatory. I don't need a description, Pierre. So it's as easy as that. So,
well, I like the fact that just like ASR, SRM can allow you to group machines. So as you mentioned, you can, like, the first thing you would want to replicate is like let's say your database, and then you'd have your middleware, and then on top of that you'd have your web app or your like
Right.
web
Front
server, like
end.
your edge.
Right.
um and the fact that you can group them and then control which order they come in um to your application is very, very useful, and can avoid a lot of like timeout issues and retry issues
Mhm.
when they spin back up for the first time. That's cool.
Yeah, and that's why it's good, again, when you're planning to know how your apps work. Because 'cause I've been there too, where you're like, "What server does it I don't know." So defining how your application works is good too. So you don't find out the hard way. So we can create, test, and run those recovery plans that we just set up that web app one. Um, so here's a lengthy slide on it, but we have a good video for this one too, where we just can show how you can create a test plan, test the recovery plan, and then actually run a live recovery plan. So we have one more
It's
demo.
funny. I used to make a joke when I was doing presentations or even meeting with customers about recovery plans,
Hmm.
where they're saying if you've got a recovery plan, if you've never tested your recovery plan, you don't really have a recovery plan,
Why not?
because if it's hasn't been tested, then I
I
wouldn't
mean, it might
consider that.
be. Right.
And I've even talked to one customer that said, we don't have a recovery plan. We have a restore plan. The recovery
Oh wow.
is inherent. Like it's assumed that you've got a recovery plan if you've got a
Wow.
restore plan.
That's a lot of confidence.
I know, I know. Uh, but on the other end, I've had also one customer that I told them, I said, we've done an assessment of their environment. That's
Mhm,
back in my consulting days.
mhm.
Um, and I said, you kind of failed the assessment because you don't have a business continuity and disaster recovery plan. And he went, I have a plan. And he literally went behind his desk to a bookshelf, pulled out a binder, blew the dust off the top, and then said, here's the plan. We spent a lot of money having some consultants build it for us. But if
Well,
the people that are actually supposed to enable and
r
enact the plan don't know about the plan, you don't have a plan. And I
plans are
feel
gonna
this
work.
exact same about the testing.
Right. Well, if that's the building that goes kapooey too, and that's where the plan is, that's not really good. So, yeah, let's show what the process looks like. So we're in our protection group and select that web app one we created
Mhm.
and click on recovery plans and select web app recovery plan. And then we're gonna click on steps because now we're going to prioritize those VMs, this database coming up before the app. So we're going to give it a priority group, the highest one. Yes, I want to change it. Yes. So yeah, you just go through and select the correct priority. Because again, it would be like, if you for some reason replicating Active Directory and no one can log in because it's been the last thing to come up. But now we have Azure Active Directory. So here we go. So the app's going to come up after the database. So it'll actually work. I'll select test. So let's test it out. So without impacting prod, we can test it out.
And it would test in a sandbox
Stand
environment.
correct. So you can test that your web app's going to work with the database after it's failed over, see if anything's wrong. So you can reconfigure things, maybe there's a hard IP in there versus DNS. So here you can see it failed over to the test site or to the target site, and it's in a test scenario right now. But here everything's up and running, not impacting prod. We're able to test our failover, and then on the back end you could clean this up, shut it down, clean up everything because you're just testing. So
So now that it's tested, it's an actual plan.
exactly, we tested the
Exactly.
plan. We don't just have it on paper. And then the final thing is when you want to run it for real. So a planned migration, or like I've seen people kind of preceding an environment, or you actually know you're gonna have maybe you're gonna have a power outage, so and it's planned. So you can run it. It's just gonna warn you you're doing this for real. You accept these terms and you click next, and It's kind of similar to what we did in test, but you're going to run over into the other site and become primary on your DR site.
Yeah, I've had many conversations with experts that know more than I do, and there was always a like multiple school of thoughts as to whether or not you want to automate the actual failover in a disaster, because
I don't know.
there's some that say no, you want to have a human that hits the big red button, and the others that say no, if your telemetry has told you that your site has been down for X amount of time, that it should automatically fail over and then notify you that it's been failed over. SRM actually gives you the possibility of doing both, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think I'd rather hit the button. I don't know. I've seen it go awry when people automate failovers. It was like, just kidding. It was just a blip in the connection.
Yeah. All right. I think we've covered all of our units.
Cool.
We are left with the ever popular knowledge check.
Where you get cookies.
Where you get cookies.
Oh, there we go.
All right. So if we're going to test the knowledge, and if you are listening right now and you want to answer those questions in the chat and see whether or not you've got them right. So if we go to the first question. So your company's considering deploying VMware SRM to provide disaster recovery for their Azure VMware solution. What is the recommended connection that needs to exist between both primary and secondary? And I think the key word here is recommended.
Yes. So
what do you think, Amy?
Well, I mean, peering between Azure VMware Solution. I mean, that's a generic peering.
No, I don't think so.
No. Express route global reach is pretty important to talk to other sites.
Because there's multiple ways to talk to other sites. There's express route global reach, and there is VPN.
Yep.
And VPN is less secure and probably a little bit less robust than express route, but costs a lot less. So depending on what your company can do, let's see what the answer is.
Dun, 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 dun.
You got it right.
Express route global reach, yeah. Get so excited.
All right, why don't you take this next question?
All right. So which of the following scenarios does VMware SRM not support? Keyword not support for implementation of BCDR. So A, from an on-premises VMware vCenter site to the recovery site in Azure VMware Solution Private Cloud. Let's see. From a primary Azure VMware Solution site in one Azure region to a secondary Azure VMware Solution site in another region. So far it sounds good to me, but
that sounds reasonable.
Yeah. And then last is from on-premises VMware vCenter to Azure VMs, like to IaaS, Azure VMs.
Yeah, so that would be VM replication and not
reconfiguring
VMware SRM, because there are ways you can replicate VMs running elsewhere, but it doesn't do all of the testing, and it's just a replicated VM. So
and it's a VMware VM, not an Azure VM.
That's right. So I would say that is the scenario that is not supported by BCDR.
Right. I mean, that'd be refactoring your application. There you go. Bam! X goes to square.
X takes the square. I really have to take that one. All right. And I believe it's the last question.
Cool.
An administrator has established connectivity between your primary and your secondary Azure VMware solution site. What is the next step in the process for setting up protection for their workload? So is it to replicate the VMs between those sites? Or is it to install the VMware Recovery vSphere replication appliance? Or is it to deploy a new express route gateway?
Well, they already have connectivity.
That's right.
So, but you can't replicate VMs yet unless you've installed something.
That's right.
Process of elimination. I would think B, install
B,
SRM.
That's right. You are correct. X takes the square. I really like that expression.
Tic-tac-toe.
Tic-tac-toe, exactly. All right. So for all of you at home who have been following up with us, if you want to go back and do this again, the aka.ms/learn live 2022-0301E is where the source material for this session is. You can go there, you can walk through. There's a few more details because it's a bit more wordy. If you're a type of person that learns better by reading, go. I highly encourage you to go through that learn module and all of the other ones that may be found on Microsoft Learn.
Yeah, it's great going through this with you, Pierre.
And so we had fun taping this series. And if you want to watch the whole series, there's probably one already there. There's the 2 that we did for this particular event, and there's one more coming next week that can be found at aka.ms/learn live run VMware workloads in Azure VMware Solution, with a lot of dashes. So just either copy what's on the screen or use your phone to get that QR code. And Amy, that was great working with you and on these session. Thank you very much for your time, and for everybody who was watching. Thanks a lot. And
thanks for your questions.
Exactly. So we'll see you around.
Yeah.
Ciao.
See ya.